Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Today we're in our Shipyards on the Delaware exhibit, one of the newest ones we have on the ship, and I'm here with one of my favorite artifacts. This poster was made by the Long Beach Shipyard while Battleship New Jersey was being reactivated in 1981-1982, and it lists all the major milestone dates that they were expecting throughout the battleship's recommissioning process. My favorite thing on here is that they list commissioning date as January 15th of 1983, and they actually were able to do it ahead of schedule and commission the ship in December of 1982, which means that this month is the 43rd anniversary of the battleship being reactivated for the final time. Being removed over 4 decades like we are, it's easy to forget how contentious reactivating the battleships was. And it really was a decades-long process that started with New Jersey being decommissioned in Vietnam and continued right up into the 80s. And just because New Jersey was reactivated didn't mean that the process ended at that point, because then the debate shifted to whether they were going to keep reactivating and funding the reactivation of the other 3 Iowa-class battleships or not. So it really wasn't until Wisconsin was commissioned in 1988 that that fight ended. And then the fight was to keep them in service, which within 3 years of that was lost. So in today's video, I've spent a tremendous amount of time researching some of the folks who were for and against the reactivation process, and I've pulled quotes or at least sentiments from these folks from that period, that contentious period of the 1980s. We work to not be political on this channel, and so I believe everybody I'm going to be mentioning is no longer in office or running for office, but it's really worth seeing, and I will on occasion say whether folks were, which political party they're from, what state they're from, that sort of stuff. It's interesting to see that you've got folks from both parties on both sides of this issue. What's more, it's interesting that a lot of these guys, if you look them up, are former military folks themselves. Many of the guys involved in this argument, both for and against, served in the U.S. military during World War II, and now are sitting as senators or some other position some 40 years later, debating whether this other World War II veteran should continue to serve into the 1980s. And that's really interesting to see. Battleships have always been contentious, even going back to when they were the undisputed queens of the seas. Whether you're going to build or operate more has always generated political debate because of the massive amount of funding required for them. But that only gets worse the further ahead in time you go, the more systems are out there that are capable of destroying a battleship. So, without further ado, here are some of the folks. Oh, I guess I should also say, my research has come from a couple of main places. First, I went through a lot of the magazine articles that came out about the battleships. We have a tremendous amount of those in the museum's collection, and they will often give the sound bite quote of these various people. Senator such and such says, "No way, they're dinosaurs." Senator such and such says, "Absolutely, they're unsinkable." So I've pulled quotes like that from a number of these articles. And also, we've got this really cool collection right here, which is a stack of correspondence that one of our board members here at the museum now made with many of these politicians back during the debate to reactivate the Iowa-class battleships. So I'd especially like to thank Captain Walt Urban, United States Navy retired, who donated this correspondence to the museum. At the time, he was a captain in the United States Army who was interested in the naval gunfire support that battleships could provide, and decided to write several congressmen, and they wrote him responses which he saved. He would later cross decks to the Navy's Public Affairs Office and retire as a full Navy captain. Without further ado, let's start with the opponents to reactivating the battleship. Without a doubt, the 2 most vocal opponents in the Senate are Senator Dale Bumpers, a Democrat from Arkansas, and Senator Ted Stevens, a Republican from Alaska. Bumpers was against reactivation, saying it's like reactivating the horse cavalry. If battleship guns are so great, why have we not put one on a ship for the past 35 years? Senator Ted Stevens, while being very vocal on the Senate floor, doesn't have all that many quotes in these magazines, but he is well known as the main opponent. He acknowledges that the program would be good for the budget in that reactivating a battleship from mothballs costs as much as a new frigate, but is a significantly more capable vessel. But he argues that battleships would be nothing but a floating missile silo, and subs are much harder for the enemy to find. So the whole point of bringing back the battleships was to arm them with the brand new Tomahawk cruise missiles. But battleships have very little defenses against being struck by actual missiles, and so going with something like a submarine would make way more sense than bringing back the battleships. Another prominent opponent is Senator William Proxmire, a Democrat from Wisconsin. He opposed battleship reactivation. However, he says, I met with Myers, talking about Charles Myers, who was one of the main lobbyists trying to get battleships back, because he's a very bright and engaging person. He tried to say it was inconsistent for me to support the LSD-41 program and not the battleships. No, those are two very different matters. The key thing is that with each battleship you would need air defenses, maybe a couple of cruisers, picket ships, and a submarine, a whole task force. And that's precisely what I'm trying to get the Navy away from. My philosophy is that we need vessels designed so that they can operate independently rather than in task forces. He also is alleged to have said when he heard that battleships were being reactivated, they've got to be kidding. Another opponent is Senator Lowell Wicker, a Republican from Connecticut. I've paraphrased what he said. He didn't really have a soundbite. It was a whole paragraph of stuff. He agrees with Senator Ted Stevens and strongly opposes reactivation, citing that Exocet missiles in the Falklands conflict and other modern munitions are effective against battleship armored hulls, and more importantly, their vulnerable superstructures. So there is an informed discussion going on, and it's interesting that a lot of these guys involved in the discussion support the Navy in a lot of other matters. Proxmire was in favor of building LSD-41, but not in favor of the battleships. Wecker understands the threat that missiles pose to battleships. As someone who grew up with 21st century politics, it is really refreshing hearing politicians make their own decisions and make informed comments on subjects. Congressman Joseph Adabo, a Democrat from New York, and chairman of the Defense Subcommittee of the House, was opposed to fully funding the reactivation of Missouri, the third ship to be brought back, until more was known about how successful New Jersey's reactivation was. He made this quote in 1983 when New Jersey had just been reactivated. Iowa was set to be reactivated in 84, but he didn't want to fund Missouri to be reactivated in 85. She would in fact be reactivated in 86 after they had learned some lessons from New Jersey and Iowa, and Missouri's reactivation and Wisconsin subsequent to that would both be a little bit different from New Jersey and Iowa's. He did, however, approve advanced funding. So it's good to see that opponents are fiscally responsible, but not like outright, I don't want to do this. It's, well, we've got one in service right now, just one in service. Let's see how it goes before we spend a ton of money. Here's some advanced funding to keep the program rolling a little bit, but we're not going to give you hundreds of millions of dollars. It would cost somewhere around $326 million to reactivate New Jersey, and then a little bit more for the other Iowas because they had not received the work that New Jersey did in the 1960s. Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Thayer, a naval aviator, said that carriers are vulnerable and a 600-ship Navy detracts from the other services. He's not against the battleship so much as the concept of a 600-ship Navy that Secretary Lehman was proposing. He only served in that role for 1 year before resigning. Another quite famous and quite vocal opponent to the battleships wasn't a politician. He was the famous author Norman Palmer, or is the famous author Norman Palmer. He's editor of Jane's Fighting Ships at the time, and he was against reactivation, saying, "It's ridiculous. With a Navy short of people with critical skills, it makes no sense to bring back ships which require a crew of 1,800 men." He also believed battleships to be vulnerable to shaped charge missiles, and that they're sitting ducks as they can be easily spotted by satellites. That battleship will stand out like a sore thumb, he says. Also, if we've got our cruise missiles on 3 destroyers and the enemy detects 50 destroyers, he doesn't know which ones have the cruise missiles. Thus, we have forced the enemy to send a plane over each destroyer to find out. Palmer, of course, is even more of a naval authority than any of the other folks I've listed, and his arguments make reasonable and logical sense. I also threw in here some of my favorite quotes from uncited sources. For example, an unnamed Pentagon staff member said, "Modernize them," talking about the battleships. "Oh, sure. They're going to throw away the oars." An unnamed Pentagon official in one of the magazine articles said that lobbyists for Todd Shipyards and Lytton opposed battleships, but they never went. They opposed battleships because they were in favor of new construction, but they didn't lobby against them because they knew that the battleships would bring some work to their shipyards. Some other figures that opposed reactivation: David McDonald, who was the chief of naval operations in 1966, opposed reactivating New Jersey for the Vietnam War. The day he retired was the day that she was announced that she was being brought back. Another chief of naval operations, Thomas Hayward, who was CNO in 1980, was hesitant to bring back the battleships for fear it would jeopardize reactivation of Oriskany. However, he was intrigued by Charles Meyer's battle carrier proposal for New Jersey because it would offer more vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. So he was opposed purely because he wanted more flight decks. By far, the most influential opponent to the battleships, and probably the most successful, was naval veteran and President Jimmy Carter, a Democrat from Georgia. He opposed the spending bill for battleship reactivation throughout his entire presidency and attacked Senator Stennis, whose Armed Forces Committee had submitted the bill for the inefficiency applying hundreds of millions of dollars to resurrect 1940s technologies. Carter wrote the Senate Armed Service Committee that unrequested increases in R&D, research and development, and procurement could adversely affect today's military readiness. He added that the reactivation of the battleships would aggravate current Navy ship manning problems while resurrecting 1940s technologies. Next up, I've got a couple of folks who stay on the fence throughout the process, who really I'm only going to bring up because they show up in the correspondence here. One is, well, two are the senators from New Jersey, who I believe Captain Urban wrote because he was a New Jersey resident, and neither of them seem to take a strong chance. So that's Senator Frank Lautenberg, Democrat from New Jersey, and Senator Bill Bradley, Democrat from New Jersey. Lautenberg writes back basically, "Hey, thank you for making me aware of this," but doesn't take a side one way or the other. Bradley writes back that he was going to inquire with the Defense Department, and then he followed up on his letter with the Defense Department's letter back. So it's interesting seeing both of those things here in the correspondence that's been donated. He also wrote Captain Urban a long letter talking about his various spending priorities, which has nothing at all to do with battleships, but I guess seeing Captain Urban as a lobbyist, he wrote him to let him know what his thoughts were on things to get his support, I imagine. But he was interested in reducing spending on some of the projects he thought was frivolous, such as the B-1 bomber, the MX missile, and deleting one of the 2 nuclear carriers that had been proposed, one of the Nimitz-class carriers. Another senator on the fence is Gary Hart, a Democrat from Colorado. He's on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and he doesn't explicitly say that he will reactivate or not reactivate the battleships. He just cites that he has given constant support of effective and innovative ways to improve national defense. So that's a pretty political non-answer. Another interesting person, a dominant person at this time that stayed on the fence was Senator John Stennis, Democrat from Mississippi, who was the chair of the Armed Services Committee, remember, who had passed that bill through that Carter reprimanded. Stennis is such a big naval proponent that he got a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier named after him. But throughout the battleship debate, he largely doesn't lend his support one way or the other and kind of passes stuff through the way that the rest of the committee goes. So some of the folks who are in favor of battleship reactivation, John Warner, Republican from Virginia, was immediately behind Charles Myers' attempts to bring battleships back. Strom Thurmond, Republican from South Carolina, was for battleships. He himself is a World War II combat veteran. A combat veteran from across the aisle, Senator Daniel Inouye, Democrat from Hawaii, was also in favor of battleships. One of the main proponents in 1967, when Battleship New Jersey is reactivated, is Senator Richard Russell, Democrat from Georgia, and chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. He was probably the leading force in pushing New Jersey's reactivation through. In addition to prominent politicians, the Marine Corps Commandant, General Robert H. Barrow, was as in favor of reactivation as possible. He debates people on the subject in favor of it. And one of his main quotes is, "You get a tremendous psychological effect from a battleship wherever it goes. People quickly realize this is something they can't deal with." North Vietnamese foot soldiers stood their ground against and fired their rifles at supersonic jet airplanes, but nobody ever stood up to the New Jersey. Secretary John Lehman, of course, is in favor of it, and I have many, many quotes from him. I'm not going to read all of them because this video is going pretty long. Russell Hale, a former aviator and senior staff member on the Sea Power Subcommittee of the House Armed Services Committee, agreed so much with reactivating the battleship that he forwards copies of Myers' report to several powerful congressmen like Graham Claytor and the Secretary of the Navy. Some of the top people in the Navy still oppose battleships privately, but when they testified before Congress, they gave at least lukewarm approval because so many folks were in favor of it at this point. So Secretary of the Navy Claytor was so impressed with the idea of reactivating the battleships that he forwards it on to the Chief of Naval Operations, asking to look into the potential for utilizing one or more of the battleships. Today, with no major caliber guns in service, it seems appropriate to re-examine the utility of this almost free heavy gun asset. Got a bunch of other Reagan cabinet officials who said positive things. Obviously, they're going to. It's the president doing it, and they're in his cabinet, so they'll support it. John Towers, Republican from Texas, introduces the bill that funds Iowa and New Jersey, so he's incredibly in favor of it. Senator Alphonse D'Amato, Republican from New York, supports it because he's trying to get Iowa's task force homeported at Staten Island. Probably one of the most important supporters in the Senate was Senator Jeremiah Denton, a Republican from Alabama, a pilot, and a Vietnam War prisoner of war who was held in North Vietnam from 1965 until 1973. I know the question from Senator Bumpers. Bumpers was one of the opponents who questions reactivating the Iowas, is sincere, and I will give him a sincere answer. In Vietnam, we lost hundreds of aircraft at a great cost in lives as well as dollars that could have been saved had a battleship been on station. A battleship could have knocked out the Than Hoa Bridge that I was bombing at the time I was shot down. We lost 5 planes in one day on that target. I point out that the Than Hoa Bridge was only 12 miles inland, well within the range of the 16-inch guns of the Iowa-class battleships. There is a reason for those ships, and thank God the Navy is coming forward and asking for them again. When you have a decorated combat veteran like that come out and support, it's very hard to oppose it at that point. You have other politicians like Ernest Hollings, who supported modernizing all four and sponsored the amendment in the fiscal year '82 defense appropriation bills to procure more funding for the Iowas. Senator John Hines, who was a longtime supporter of the Iowa class and wrote the Hines Amendment that funded the initial refurbishment of the Iowa class. Senator Sam Nunn, a Democrat from Georgia, who is a part of the Senate Armed Forces Committee, repeatedly endorsed reactivation of all four Iowas, sees the value in heavily armored long-range ships, and sees the outfitting of New Jersey with modern components will boost naval capabilities and prove the viability of reactivation for other Iowas. You may be assured, he says, that I will closely monitor the progress of the Battleship reactivation program to ensure that there are no unnecessary delays in the program and that our sea power is not affected adversely. And then, of course, we have the biggest supporter of all. That is the lobbyist Charles Myers, or Chuck Myers, a member of the fighter mafia. And he writes a lot of things in support of the battleships. I'll break it down to this one quote. The thing that always impressed me was how vulnerable ships were to air attack. We sank every ship we ever went after. He's a World War II and Korean War veteran. It was around 1951 that I began to have misgivings about the way that we used tactical aviation. We kept getting assigned to attack targets which were heavily defended, and we kept losing some pretty nifty fellas. I was sent out again and again to attack the Sindok lead mines in North Korea. If such targets had to be gone after at all, it seemed to me there must be a better way to do it. Very often I look into prominent military problems that might call for hardware which is manufactured by one or another of the half-dozen big corporations for which he consults. But I also make broad studies which may serve to help my clients reorient their thinking. They want to know the market, and that means total defense problems. I can't be narrow in my thinking. Lots of times my clients don't agree with me. They don't expect to. At first, I had some trouble trying to understand the value of the surface navy. Sure, I could understand it in 1941 when the war was global, but if you're working a present-day land war problem of NATO versus the Warsaw Pact, it becomes a lot less clear. What I finally discovered is that at a time when we have to worry most about conflicts in the Third World, the most important non-nuclear function of the Department of the Navy, and that includes the Marine Corps, is forcible entry. The Department of the Navy is equipped to transport the troops, deliver them, provide them with logistics and fire support, and then withdraw them gracefully. No other military service under one command has that capability. We didn't have a sturdy firepower base to support the troops once they were inserted. I worried a lot about that. Many people, of course, see tactical aviation as being able to do the job. TAC Air is my thing, says Myers. I knew what it could do, but I thoroughly understood its limitations. It's vulnerable to attack, it's easily interrupted by the weather, and it's not continuous. When you need support on the battlefront, you need it continuously, not just now and then. The biggest thing I learned from my study was the valuable contribution of naval gunfire to some of the most successful military operations this country has ever staged. So, there you have it, some of the prominent arguments for and against bringing the Iowas back. It's really hard now, over 40 years later, to imagine that argument because they are brought back. But it's really interesting to see some of the reasonable and legitimate complaints about bringing the ships back and some of the folks who were in favor of supporting it. I'm blown away by how bipartisan this argument was. So what do you think? Did it make sense to reactivate all 4 Iowas? Or do you think the Navy should have stopped with 1 or 2? Or not reactivated any of those 40-year-old battleships at all? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, as well as from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support. There's a link in the description below if you'd like to donate to support the museum. You can Also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find about the museum and our channel. Thanks for watching.